Welcome to Scene Change, a podcast by the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. All about equality, opportunity, accessibility, and the arts. Here, you'll learn adaptive techniques from performers in the know. We are changing what it means to be blind, one stage at a time. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scene Change. I'm Lizzy Muhammad Park, your host of the show, and today's episode will be amazing. We've got an author of multiple books, choreographer, movement analyst, and so much more. But in my opinion, above all else, the thing that makes this guest of ours stand out today is that she is an artist who reimagines work through lenses that are too often unexplored. That's something that we love here on Scene Change. So we're going to welcome to the show, Miss Alexandra Beller. Welcome to the show, Alexandra. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. So you've done so many things throughout your career. Could you just give our guests an outline, just an overview? I sort of named some of what you've done, but a little bit more specific. Of your career.
Yeah. I started as a performer in dance, modern contemporary dance. I danced with the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Dance Company for about 7 years and was lucky enough to tour the world and be exposed to a lot of amazing creative process. And then I got the bug to create my own work. So I left his company just before I turned 30 and started a company of my own and was making dance theater with a lot of speaking in it. And was, like learning to coach text and was really helping dancers to act. And that time I was also teaching and I was studying somatics and I wanted to deepen my teaching practice. So I went and got my MFA, and that didn't really give me the sense of structure and depth that I wanted. So I got something called a CMA, Certified Movement Analyst degree, which is a degree in Laban Bartenieff movement analysis. And that's what brought me into theater. So right after I got that degree, I started choreographing and movement directing for theater. And I really left my company behind as a devising company, and kept it as an education company. So I still run that company and I produce workshops and create content through that. But I really fell in love with theater. So then I went full throttle into theater and was coaching actors and deepening my practice into somatics and started seeing private clients for somatic therapy and bringing it all together, just really being interested in feeling allowing people to map the blueprint of themselves for themselves. Towards whatever they wanted to do, a play, a life, another kind of career. And then along the way, I started writing this book that I turned in yesterday, called The Anatomy of Art, which is breaking down the artistic process through these different lenses. So that was like a long project. But then because of Laban and Bartenieff, I can go into these other modalities, which is amazing for me. So I coach ballroom dancers and music conductors. And that's my second book is I co-wrote a book on Laban and Bartenieff and somatics and embodiment for music conductors. So I think that's kind of the rundown. And I have two teenagers.
Wow. That just it's a really cool career path. And I want to delve a little bit into the personal side for you, because I've heard you say on other podcasts that you started off as a dancer in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but you didn't have the stereotypical quote, dance body. Is it fair to say that you've had to create space for yourself in the dance world or in the world of movement, more specifically?
Totally fair. I mean, I grew up a little bit bigger as a kid and, was in dance. And of course, back then, which was the 80s, there wasn't much flexibility in the industry. I think there's a little bit more. I'm just going to call it tolerance, not really invitation. So I think most of the people that I was dancing with were like, "You're never going to make it. You should quit." And even in college, I think the running feeling was like, "You're going to have to go back to school for something else because you're never going to have a professional dance career." And they weren't wrong looking at the landscape. There were no women that weren't really thin in major modern dance companies at the time, and there never had been. So, they weren't wrong, but of course there's a first of everyone. There was a first Black lawyer, and there was a first
Hmm.
Black president, and there was a first, female astronaut. And, so I ended up being the first person in a big dance company that wasn't like, didn't have a pretty traditional dancer's body. I don't know if I made space. I just showed up. And,
Mm.
I was lucky enough that somebody, I mean, it wasn't really possible for me to make the space. Bill made the space. And, but I took it, and I
Mm.
pushed for it in my life.
I love that because that's what we often have to do as blind performers, as blind people. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That's something that it comes up for us often
Hmm.
because it hasn't always been done before. So sometimes being that first or having someone, as you mentioned, having someone else who's willing, when you knock on the door, who's willing to open it,
Yeah.
like that goes so far. So thank you for sharing that. Do you think that that experience that you had in dance, is that what sort of led you to assist others in doing the same or similar kind of work? I'm thinking here in terms of the work that you do, your healing and CMA work and things like that.
Um, it's so hard to differentiate once you get to a certain point, like what was responsible for what. I think I've always been like a high feeling person, and I've always been what we might call an empath, and other people's experiences have always affected me deeply. Once I started to realize that I had some kind of skill to help people read themselves and to make reflections that would help them go inward and find things that they were looking for and bring them back out. And that felt like such gratifying work for me. Um, so yeah, it's hard to break down whether, like, and
Right.
there were other obstacles and constrictions other than body type that I've moved through. So it all starts to just become like the pressure of the environment that creates the shape of your life.
Mm, mm, that's true. That's so true. It's not just pinpointing one specific area, it's both and.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of everything, and that makes total sense. Could you tell the audience, just for those who have never heard of it, and I think we're going to delve, yes, more specifically into, oh gosh, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation, into the Lapon. Um, yes, Lavon. um, we'll delve more specifically into that in the next question. But could you just give us a general overview of what a CMA degree is, and is movement analysis at all similar to reading body language?
100%. In fact, I
Okay.
think most of the field of nonverbal communication actually came directly out of Laban's work. So he wanted to develop a system of notation, like music notation, to be able to basically write down a dance the way you can write down a symphony. But in order to create the actual notation, he had to analyze every aspect of human movement and really towards meaning. It's not just an analysis of what is going where at what tempo. It's also there's meaning in the analysis because there's a whole category called shape, that is about why do you think this person is moving? Is it their own body just moving in space? Are they trying to get to somebody, to somewhere or something? Or are they like negotiating and adapting? And that category of his work is what became a lot of the field of nonverbal communication, some of the field of child psychology. So essentially, in Laban, we look at the human body. We do look at what is doing what body part is doing what action, with what quality or dynamic, in what area of space, through what pathway, and then why. And the composite of all of those questions that we can ask of human movement starts to paint a picture. And of course, you never can know from the outside what is happening in another human. Like that's not possible. We're all unique and we are the only experts on ourselves. And from the inside of the body, you can never, despite mirrors and videotapes, you really can never get an outside eye to yourself and be able to get a true reflection that's not fed through your own filters. So there is, as long as you're working with somebody who is able to use the system with humility and inquiry, it's an incredible tool to be able to relate to people and create material from it, also correct material, feedback information.
Wow. We're going to get into correcting in just a minute here, but I'd like to talk and really delve into for a minute this idea of creating. In the Laban technique, if I may call it a technique, are you sort of memorizing certain poses and then able to then write it down for other future, for example, dancers to follow? Is that how it works? Almost like a language in a sense?
Well, yeah, and I don't really do the notation part. Like what I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in is the analysis that had to come before being able to create symbols. So yes, there absolutely is a motif based language, so a symbolic language, symbolism. Um, that where people can write down every movement that's happening in a dance. I mean, the Laban's not making up any material. This is to be able to look at what somebody else is doing and notate it. And so, yes, there are dances that are written on paper that we have no video for, that somebody who knows this system can go and look at the pages and be like, okay, so this is the movement, this is where you're going, and it'll look ostensibly exactly the way the choreographer 100 years ago created it. So that exists. That's not really what I do. I'm interested in like, so what kind of meaning does it give when somebody is moving mostly forward and back as opposed to up and down as opposed to side, or what kind of meaning is it when somebody moves with this suddenness as opposed to this hesitation, and the like the possible outpourings of that, places I can take that in both theater and somatics and my own life and teaching, feel pretty limitless.
I love that. Thank you for clarifying that. And the reason why I wanted to delve into that is because so I've taken dance classes. I don't, I'm not I dance for fun. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? I'm by no means a professional
Good.
dancer, but I think that something like um Laban's system would have been incredibly helpful, and not only would have been, but would be incredibly helpful for future blind dancers because, I heard you say in another podcast, it was, as you just said here, even it was notated 100 years ago before video and this and
Mm-hmm.
that, but now everything sort of relies on video. But
Mm-hmm.
if we have that notation available, I'm sure, I shouldn't say I'm sure because I don't know, I haven't done the research, but there probably isn't a way that it's been made accessible yet. But if there are any dancers out there, blindsided or otherwise, who can think of a way to make this an accessible format, I think that would be an excellent way to teach blind people dance, especially virtually, because virtual dance classes, of course, after COVID have become huge. So
Mm-hmm.
I just love to just throw out, thought ideas,
Yeah.
this is, of course, a very just thought provoking and thought forward sort of, podcast. So I love that you clarified that, and thank you for doing that, even though I know that that's not specifically what you do. And so I want to delve more into that. I loved hearing about your healing work. Um, could you tell me um just an example? You're great at giving examples, so I don't I don't mind putting you on the
Mhm.
spot here. Just an example of what some of that healing work might look like.
Yeah, well, I am a strong proponent of the I'm going to say fact that that all of our systems in the body, emotional, spiritual, physical, mental, intellectual, political, etc., are all sharing the same material and are all in an ecosystem where one thing changes everything. So I don't really believe that we can actually compartmentalize, like the physical from the emotional. I know that in my body there's absolutely no filter, and I feel everything physically that I feel emotionally. And so I really love to listen to language when a student or a client is talking to me about something they want or something they don't want. I'm listening for the words that act as levers between two systems. So if somebody says, like, I feel lost, and they're talking about some kind of more emotional or spiritual thing, but being lost is also something that happens to your body. I don't feel grounded. And of course, that's, they're probably talking about, again, some more like emotional, psychological feeling, but the ground and gravity and your body weight are things that are, also able to be measured and adapted. So I like listening for those language levers where one system talks to another. And sometimes it's something that's about relationship or, even politics. And then finding a physical way to interact with it. So for example, if somebody says, like, I'm feeling lost, I might say, great, let's work on a really specific walking pattern, and let's like carve out a pathway in this space, and let's take a kind of ritualistic repetitive walking where you are physically locating yourself in this room. And I won't necessarily describe it like that. I'll just give them the exercise. But then through the exercise, they're like, yeah, I feel a little bit more present suddenly, or, I don't feel grounded. Great. Let's do a little meditation in which we're really pouring body weight in the floor, and then let's work on weight shift and really feeling the dynamic alignment of your equilibrium and your body weight able to flow through your body into the floor. And then suddenly they're like, oh, I feel more grounded. Yeah, because it's all in your body. And then the opposite works as well. Somebody will be talking about their hip is feeling sticky, or their arm is hurting, and I'll watch what's happening in their body, and I'll say, like, no, it looks like this arm is kind of isolating from the shoulder and it's not really going into your core. And then I start talking about this hand to spine connection. And then maybe I'm asking questions about, like, do you feel like you've been doing things not feeling like you're really behind them, or like your center is not really connected to what you're doing lately? And I don't necessarily expect a yes, but it's a question that does come up when I'm watching them and I move their arms from the shoulders and not be connected to their core. So that will bring up a question, or we'll be working on a dynamic in the category called effort. And we're working on the category that's around flow, called flow, which is about control. And I'm noticing that when this person uses control, they also always use force.
Mm.
And force is a separate category. It's part of the category of weight. And you don't have to do them together. So I'm like, that's interesting. Can we try using like delicacy and control? What would that feel like to you? And they're like, oh, I don't get that. I don't like that. Great. So that seems like that's not something that your body does all that often. And that maybe even there's a little resistance to. How does control work for you in your life? Do you feel like when you use control, you usually feel like you have to put your weight behind it, or use a little more force or pressure? And my partner jokes around when I teach workshops in this material. I'll come home and he'll say, so how many people cried today? And it's usually a sign that like things went well. If people are like, oh my God, I thought we were just talking about my shoulder.
That's how you know it's good therapy, you know? So I want to delve into that aspect that I mentioned before. Um, I guess it would be a sort of category of, and I don't want to make too much of a dichotomy here because, of course, these things probably are on a spectrum and they flow and things like that. But correction versus comfort.
Mm,
There's so much precision involved with dance, doing it
mhm,
just this way, just that way.
mhm,
And then, with embodiment comes, really feeling and sort of
mhm,
allowing it to come out from my understanding. And please do
mhm,
correct me if I'm wrong.
mhm,
And I want to give you the specific example, which, I'm not sure if you've dealt with it before, but even if you haven't, I really enjoy when conversations take a turn and just kind of like new, fresh ways of thinking of things. So too often, we'll get emails at the performing arts division, um, where people say, I'm totally blind since birth. And people are telling me that I'm not moving in a quote unquote normal way, or my facial expressions are off. And how do I, you know, how do I maintain confidence on stage, for example, but still have good stage presence?
mm,
And to me, this is really coming down to this question of you want to get it right because you're playing a role or a character or something like that, right? You're dancing a
mhm,
number, a choreography, certain
mhm,
things with choreography. But you also want to be comfortable in your body. You also
mhm,
want to maintain your confidence because the minute
mhm,
you lose confidence, well, now you look off
mhm.
for a totally different
Yeah.
reason.
Mhm.
So what's your take on that, or even um, what might, for example, some healing work look like around something like that, lacking confidence within the body?
Well, yeah, and that was a big example. And there's a lot in it, and there are things in it that I can hear that you're not asking about. I also feel like that person it needs to like decipher what their kind of value system is around adjusting to a system or an infrastructure or a set of expectations, because that idea of somebody saying you don't look normal
Mm,
is such a really requires such a reframe. And so like the first thing, which I know is not the question that you're asking, is like I would want to ask that person, like, how much do you want to care about this? And how much do you want to show up as yourself? And people have different levels of tolerance for being outside the expectation. Um, I developed a pretty high level of tolerance because I kind of had to, because I made the choice. Nobody forced me. I made the choice to be a professional dancer with a non traditional body type. So people talked about my body all the time. And I did not love my body and I was not confident. And people projected that onto me because they wanted it to be true. Oh, you're so confident. You love yourself. Where are you getting that from? I have never said that. You're just projecting that you want me to feel that way. I just go out and do it anyway. And that's my choice. I had a certain level of tolerance for being like, yeah, I'm not what you expect. You are judging me. I do feel it, but I'm just choosing like that's not what I can care about right now. And that's not better or worse than having a different level of tolerance for it. So that's one part, is like, first of all, figuring out like how much does this hurt?
mm,
And how much does that pain feel like it's taking away from you? Or would you like to sort of learn to tolerate that pain of being othered and judged and kind of move on with your energy and do other things? And again, there's no better way, right?
mhm,
Once a person says, yeah, I'm not tolerating that feeling, well, I want to change me. Because there's a stability mobility question, right? Like the system is hyper stable. Oh, this is the norm. Anytime anyone says that there's a norm, that's a fixed system. That's stable. That means that anyone that comes to that system, they're expected to adapt. So when you have, if you identify as having a disability, you know that often systems don't adapt, and the expectation is that you are the one that moves. You mobilize to them. You fix yourself. You figure out how to get in the building. You figure it out. We're not making space for you. We're not creating the pathway or the infrastructure or the support you need. So, and anyone that's dealt with being othered or not having what the system, quote unquote, says you need has dealt with this experience. So that first question is like, how much are you willing to tolerate that? I mean, this is a moment where the person actually has some choice, right? Getting up a building, you don't have a choice. Um, and then I think there is an interesting ecosystem around stability mobility where you are okay. So here's some kind of quote unquote norm. And I'm not tolerating the experience I have when I don't match that norm, even though like I could make that choice, but I really don't like the experience of what comes at me when I don't match it. So I want to match it better. I match it from the outside in some ways. And I think healthier is finding the way to meet some kind of standard or goal or place from the inside, which means that somebody, and this maybe goes back to your thought about like written and audio description of dance through, some kind of system that allows people to experience it, like um, describing not what it looks like, but what it feels like. And this is a thing in dance that I wish more teachers did in general, even for sighted people. Um, there's so much attention to the visual in so much of dance training, and I never use a mirror. I really wish that teachers would stop using the mirror and start talking about what something feels like. What's the task that the body is trying to do? What might you feel? You might feel that this leg wants to press down a little bit more, and then when it does that, do you feel that this other side lightens up? And then with
Mm.
that lightening, could you feel that if you shifted your weight over that leg a little, you'd have a little bit more freedom with that leg and you could extend it? Like somebody's talking about the physics and the tasks and the sensations of dance, which I wish they would do for every person, sighted or no. Take sight away from dance training would be a huge, it would just change the field in such a positive way. Um, so I think that would be like where I would enter the conversation.
Wow. That's so fascinating. I'm just sitting here. I know I don't have video on, but I just have like the hugest smile on my face because that's just so cool. I love um just reimagining work. And when I saw on your website that you do work at these, various schools, Barnard and Princeton and here, there, and everywhere, I was personally glad to have someone like you in the field because I see that you are um really, like I said this at the beginning, really doing this from the perspective of an artist. Dance is an art. Embodiment, like these things are art.
Mhm.
And the thing about art is it's what you make it. Um, so let's delve into we sort of scratched the surface and talked about we talked about your sort of philosophies or things like that regarding embodiment dance. But I would love for you to share with the audience some of your work that you've done around reimagining characters within stories. I know you've done things where you've sort of flipped different characters or
Mhm.
roles and things like that. And I found it really fascinating. So I'd love it if you could just share some of that with our audience.
Yeah, well, definitely I feel like there's always a balance between the inner and the outer. So I'm never going into a play or production and just like telling actors what to do with their bodies. I always want to understand, first of all, who they are and how they feel in their body as a human actor. And then like what's their take on this character, and how are they approaching them, and what starts to come up, and then what starts to come up in your body. And then I want to start to separate the actor's body from the character's body for a number of reasons. One, they're not the same person, so like the character, it's unlikely that you're playing a character who's just so exactly like you, unless, you're some famous Hollywood actor and they really just hired you to be you. Somebody hires, Adam Sandler to be Adam Sandler. But like for the most part, that character is going to walk, talk, sit, stand. Their posture is going to be different. Their vocal dynamics are going to be different. Their gaze, their focus, how close they like to get to people. All those things are going to be different for this character probably than for them. So I want to understand how they operate first, partly so that I can see it and not remove it, but like quiet that down so that
Mhm.
you can find how this character wants to do all of those things. And I can do this. I can do this pretty pragmatically in terms of like using the Laban system to analyze what's happening. But I'm mostly not talking to them about those technicalities. I'm mostly talking to them about sensation and spatial intent and focus. Um, so, like, for example, I worked on a show called Antonio's Song that was co written by Dale Orlander Smith and Antonio Suarez. And it was um, essentially it was his autobiography. And it was a traumatic story. And it was a one-man show. And in the show, he had to play 14 different people, all from his own life, including like himself when he was 6, and himself when he was 12, and himself when he was 20, and his mother, and his father, and his sister, and these, kind of kids he hung out with in like late 70s Brooklyn, like pretty rough time. So, and he had to go from being like narrator to his mother and then having a conversation between his 6-year-old self and his mother, back and forth, doing the dialogue for both people. So we really needed to figure out um, not only how to create, sculpt all these different characters, but the second part that I neglected to say, and I said there's two things. One is that character is not you. The other is you need to be able to enter and exit it easily, right? Like this needs to not be something where you're pulling up, excavating some traumas from your life in order to fulfill a character's moment. That's not what I believe acting is. And so, especially for something like this show with Antonio, where he's literally playing like himself as a kid receiving abuse at the hands of his parent, and he's playing the parent and his 6-year-old self, like that obviously has the potential to be incredibly re-traumatizing for him, both in rehearsal and in performance. And we had to create something where he had this incredible believability and authenticity, but he wasn't reliving it. So that needed to be really sculpted. So our process, which was the first time I'd ever done this, but I loved it. I had him get just about a paragraph monologue for one character at a time, get it off book. We were in a big space. And I'm like, don't worry about what you would do on stage. Let yourself do anything. And he's he's a beautiful mover, and he is uninhibited, and he's a great risk taker. So this was easy for him. I don't know about easy, but he did it well. So I'm like, say the monologue, do anything you want with your body, go anywhere, do anything. Don't worry. I'm not like capturing material. I'm not getting ideas for choreography. I'm just like watching you and what happens to your body. Be metaphorical, be small, be big, be wild, anything you want. And he just like repeated and repeated and repeated and just like danced while he spoke. And then I was like, okay, keep moving, but just start saying the text in your head. And then after a few rounds of that, I was like, okay, keep moving and see if you can release that monologue. And he just kept moving, dancing. And this whole time, I'm like writing all these notes and analyzing him. Well, he uses a lot of vertical dimension, and his jaw juts forward, and he has this real like grounded like thing, and he never straightens his legs, and he does a lot of this kind of action, and he uses this dynamic. And so I'm just analyzing him through all these different fields of perception, through this Laban-Bartenieff system. And then that became the profile for that character. And then I would choreograph from that profile. So then I did make him set material that he had to learn and memorize and repeat. But the material was really all from his body, and his body was calling it up from lived experience.
Wow. That is so cool. Uh, I'm kind of speechless right now. Just because the way that you've described it, you don't just go, I've, done productions and small things, high school, college, things like that. And they just, they show up, they already have the choreo down, and either you
Yeah.
got it or you don't. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? You're
Yeah.
either good at it or you're not,
Yeah.
but what you're doing is really getting it down to a science, getting it gosh, where art meets science is kind of what I'm
Hmm.
thinking of,
Yeah. Yeah.
right now. It's fascinating work. And then you've also done things, I believe was it a Midsummer Night's Dream? Where you and I haven't seen that play in so long.
And
Did you what did you do with the characters there in that production? Do you know what I'm referencing? I don't want to ruin it and get it
I
all
did
wrong.
no, I did two Midsummers, but I don't feel like there was anything. Well, oh well, Titania and Oberon
Yes, that's the
gendered.
one.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah. That was the director's choice, and I loved it. But essentially, I mean, if you just looked at the text and you switched their names, Titania's old whole part was played by was now Oberon's part. So Titania was the one who no, Oberon was the one who like fell in love with the ass and got drugged and fell into the sleep, and Titania was the one who was pulling the strings, and I liked it a lot better because there are some, kind of question, obviously like no gender should be having anything against their uh consent, and it's just a lot more freighted for a female character to basically be made to like drugged and made to fall in love with somebody. So it was nice to have that flipped, and just in general the power dynamic flipped, and in general Oberon tends to wield more, and so it was all Titania, which I loved.
And I love that story because we always talk about I shouldn't say always, we actually haven't talked about it in a few years now, but it recalls memories for me of being at we're part of the National Federation of the Blind. And so we have our summer convention each year. And sometimes we'll kind of just be up late, just spitballing and just throwing around ideas. And sometimes we go, what if we did a production of, for example, a Shakespeare play where the entire cast is blind, and what does that look like, or has some sort of level of visual impairment, and
Mhm.
what does that look like, and what how would we do this? I know we toyed with the idea, what if it was like Little Women? What if it was, and so sometimes we'll
Mhm.
just kind of have these conversations, because convention is just sort of our time to be together. Of course, we got a lot of work done during the day, but at night it's really our time to be more creative and just hang
Yeah.
out. You know what I mean? And that's something that we've toyed with. And just when I heard um, that interpretation, I was like, that would just be fascinating. Like, what would it look like yet again? If the characters were blind, what would we keep the same? But you said it was a director's choice, and I think that is just so fascinating. So if that ever does, come to fruition,
Please do it. Please do it, and then call me up because I'd love to
will
choreograph it.
do.
Because I have been embarked. I have been on a year long mentorship project where I'm mentoring this amazing woman, Kayla Hamilton, who works in dance and inside disability justice, and trying to create pedagogy for disabled performers that really releases a lot of the structures and tropes and worldviews that is currently in disability pedagogy for performing artists.
Hmm.
And one of the things that we've been talking about is like one of the major things that we want to help dismantle is this like what you said before, there's a norm. And then, yeah, let's see how close you can get to it. And that's just defunct. I mean, it's not, a healthy ecosystem to have something that's so hyper stable that you're just expecting everybody else to get to you. There has to be some kind of listening between the system and the people using the system. And yet, of course, as we all know, with disability justice, like most systems are not made to bend and flex, and the people who are using the system are meant to adapt and themselves. And so one thing that Kayla and I have been talking about is that people who have lived with some version of disability, or in other, in some ways, just like have not lived fitting into the system that exists, actually have a much higher level of creativity in their body than people that might consider themselves able bodied, because the original creative process was figuring out how to adapt to something or survive something, right? If you're walking down the street and there's a cone in the middle of the street, you go around the cone. That's the adaptation to the thing that's fixed and stable and is not moving, and you have to move around it. So I'm going to I'm going to diverge and go here and then go back there. And, people that identify as able bodied have, in general, fewer of these moments where they have to be creative and figure out what to do in the face of something that's not moving for them. And they get no celebration for that level of creativity, and people are not catalyzing that creativity towards like the arts. They're just like, yeah, you're a good survivor. No, that actual like physical skill of adapting constantly, like looking at the thing and being like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to problem solve this? That is the greatest skill that an artist can have. And people who have lived in disabled bodies have that skill at a much higher level than people who identify as able bodied. And we
That's so true.
just need a bridge to translate that. Like, okay, so then instead of saying, well, this is some kind of standard for performance, I mean, you can't walk, so you just get as close as you can to this standard. No, that's not the standard. What's the thing that you're trying to do? You're trying to create momentum. You're trying to get bodies closer together. You're trying to find connection. Like, what's the problem below? Like, walking is a symptom, or walking is a one way to get something, but walking is not the objective, right? There's some objective beneath the thing that you've told somebody to do. And most people who are teaching in the arts are not teaching from that fundamental level of like, what's the real goal? If I know what the real goal is, anybody and anybody can meet it. And the truth is that people in disabled bodies probably will figure out how to meet it faster because they are used to, oh, that's the thing that needs to be solved. I'll figure out how to do that. And, people for whom the world was sort of like designed for them have had less practice with that. So we're trying to figure out like how to talk about the fundamentals and get people to really use the language that's the root of what they really mean, not this kind of aesthetic on top of it, which is like, things that not everybody can do, see or walk or,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I love it. I'm so glad. And think that I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but so you're not our first non-blind person to be on, but and I guess it all depends on your identity, but you would be potentially our first uh maybe it's non-disabled person to be on the show. If that is correct, 'cause I actually haven't asked, and it doesn't really matter. But the point that I'd like to make here to our listeners is too often when we go to school for the arts, when we go into these various spaces, there's an assumption because of our lived experiences. There's an assumption that we're going to be rejected, we're going to be misunderstood. And I would just like to use this episode as hope for anyone who has felt that discouragement, um, be it, past, present, or going into future situations. I just want to just very directly point out that there are people in the world who, even if they don't share our exact lived experiences, through their own lived experiences can still relate to us. Because sometimes in various communities, there's this assumption that, well, if you don't look like me, if you haven't been through exactly what I've been through, you won't get it.
Mhm.
But in this conversation, Alexandra, I just really feel like you get it, on
Mhm.
on various levels. Which is why I was sort of pulling out that detail early. I'm like, was it this? Was it that? What
Mhm.
is it that
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
has helped you to get it? And you don't have to answer that question, but I just wanted to point that out to our listeners because too often life teaches us that no one's going to understand. But this is proof right here that there are people who understand. So have hope as you go into these various
Mhm.
situations, listeners,
Yeah.
and I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that.
Well, I think this is another thing that Kayla and I have been talking about and trying to get to a root system in a similar way that she's trying to develop a pedagogy that gets to what the root is that somebody is trying to do in a way in which everybody can do that thing. I think there is. I mean, you're identifying it so well and describing it so well. There is there are root experiences, and like we all have our own completely unique life, right?
Mhm.
We share these Venn diagrams with various people who identify as a woman, or people who grew up in Brooklyn, or right? And even with like somebody that I'm really unlike, there's going to be things where our Venn diagram overlaps, right? But then
Mhm.
we get into these ideas of identity, race and gender identity and sexual orientation, etc. And suddenly it's like the cellular membrane of that circle is not porous. And that's so untrue. So like, no, I grew up in a white body. I do not know what it's like to grow up in a black body. I never will. And yet there are aspects of walking into a room and having everybody look up at you and being like, you don't belong here, that I have lived in my body. There are aspects um, to various parts of all of our lived experiences where if we got down below the aesthetic or the superficial or the um, like the titles, we might find that there's more commonality. And sometimes I hear this when I hear people who are maybe more conservative on a political spectrum than me and grew up very poor, and they're exhibiting racism, but they're trying to defend it by saying like, no, I have had this particular lived experience. And I'm like, you're so close. Yes, you did. So like, if you could actually go down into that lived experience and be like, this is horrible when the police are targeting you inappropriately and disproportionately because of something that you're not controlling and you're not doing. Could you live in that for a minute and like stay in that and then expand your gaze instead of being like, no, it happens to me too. Yes, 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 yes. You're so close. It happens to you too. Can you like stay in it? That does not mean that you know what it's like to live in a black body, but you do share something that would bring you some real empathy and allow you to maybe have a conversation that's got more depth.
Mm, that's so true. It's so, so true. It reminds me, and then we'll sign off in a second here, but it reminds me of this icebreaker game that I played once. And it was called Link. And you're in this completely randomized, group. Of course, it's randomized to an extent because you're all in the same place for the same reason. It's, why
Yeah.
you're doing an icebreaker. But the purpose is to make statements about yourself, but not statements that are so obscure. that no one else can relate to, or that you think
Mm-hmm.
people can't relate to. But, you just want to say things that you think other people can relate to. And you want to see if there's anyone else in the group who has a link to you. And
Right.
then of course, once the icebreaker's over, then you have a
Everybody's
chance.
holding hands.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what this reminds me of.
I
It's
love
like,
that.
it doesn't matter what room you're in or what group you're in, there's always something that can link you to another person. So it's really about finding those commonalities. So before we leave, could you just let our listeners know where to find you, or learn more about you, or maybe connect with you in some way?
Yeah, my everything's on my email, which is alexandrabellerdances.org. And it's a hub for everything. And then you can find my writing and classes, and there's lots of free goodies on there.
There's some really good gems, everybody. She's got a previous podcast that she's done. I mean, there's some really good stuff on there. So I highly recommend that you all check it out. So thank you again for joining me. And this is an awesome discussion, Alexandra. So really, truly thank you.
Thank you.
And to every single listener out there, thank you all for supporting us and for tuning in each month. This has been another episode of Scene Change.
I'm Caitlin McIntyre, President of the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scene Change. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit our website at nfb-pad.org. There you'll find links to our social media, membership, and resources for blind performers. Thanks to everyone who makes this show happen. Scene Change is executive produced by Shane Lowe, Caitlin McIntyre, and Lizzy Muhammad Park, with audio production by Drew Mochak. Also on the team are Maddie Hendricks, Aaron Jordan, and Melissa Sprouse, with music by Ryan Strunk and Tom Page. Remember, you can be the performer you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. We'll see you next time.